I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I think this is going to be a neat program. We've been working on acquiring part of the bomber plant for about 18 months now. And I fly here at the airport in my own airplane, and I was taking off last November, and I saw these machines starting to cut the hole in the first part of the building. And now that we have all this fancy technology, I started taking pictures of this, and every time I'd go out, every couple of weeks, I'd take pictures as the plant came down, and that's kind of the basis of this program. I'm not going to show you all 1,714 slides I have. I've condensed it down to about 100. We had a real fancy party here. A lot of people attended that here this month, our gala, and we had Jonna Doolittle, which is Jimmy Doolittle's granddaughter, as our speaker that night. And she did a fantastic job. And we've taped that program, and that's going to be shown here in March. And she does a great job of telling stories about her grandfather, and I'd really recommend come seeing that story. Next month, we've got Chris Cosley from the, what's the name of his museum? The Michigan Industrial Arsenal of... Museum, and you can talk about mobilization in World War I, something that's not thought of in Detroit, but it leads into the mobilization of World War II. In February, you know her name, I can't remember her name, Mike, the girl, the lady, Melissa Milton Plum. And she's done an interactive map of the history around Willow Run. You can click on certain spots and it pops up with what went on there, and she's going to make a live presentation of that in February. So we got some great programs lined up here, so keep on coming back, and we'll show these programs to you. Do we have any people here tonight who are not members? Okay. Get some membership applications. They cannot leave the room till they fill those out. Okay. Also, because you're not involved in the museum, we're going to have you do the drawings tonight to see who wins the prizes. So we've got these non-members here to come up and do that. Let's see. If I turn off that light, does that help? Okay. Well, a little bit about the bomber plant here. Before you can tear a plant down, you've got to build a bomber plant. And this goes back to the story of the auto industry becoming involved in building airplanes. In October of 1940, they met in New York City, and Knutson, who was kind of heading the project up, had arranged with the aircraft companies. The auto companies won't build airplanes, they'll build parts, and the aircraft companies will build entire airplanes. And that was the way it was going to be until Mr. Doolittle visited Henry Ford in December of 1940, and asked for help in building the B-24 bomber. So Mr. Sorensen, Henry Ford's chief of production, went out to San Diego to look at how the consolidated B-24 bomber was being built. And we've all heard the story of him going back to his hotel room, making the drawings of the bomber plant on the hotel stationery, and going back to Consolidated the next morning and saying Ford can build a B-24 bomber an hour on an automotive assembly line. To which Reuben Fleet from Consolidated answered, "You're crazy. No one can do that." And then Sorensen said his famous thing, "We're not interested in parts. We'll build complete airplanes or nothing." And the Army was so impressed with this project. They were so desperate for bomber production, and they thought the B-24 would be the answer to their bombers, that they awarded Ford a $200 million contract to start the project. And these were based on the pencil drawings on the back of hotel stationery. And they told Ford, "We'll meet in Dayton next month to get this contract going. Go ahead and get started." So 6 weeks after the visit in San Diego, Sorensen's gone to Alfred Cohn and Associates and said, "I want a bomber plant to build bombers." He also had to pick out 4 to 5 square miles of flat, open land. And the only place he knew of they could do that readily and get in there was the Ford-owned land out here at Willow Run, which was the boys' farm that he had. Other areas around Detroit had already been built up. There would have been tremendous problems with road access and housing that was going on already. So he picked this land out here near Ypsilanti, near the Willow Run Creek. And if you look at this model right here, you can see there's a model B-24 sitting on the table, scale to the factory to see how it would fit inside this building. And this building was designed in 6 weeks. It was a rapidly designed factory by Cohn and Associates. And even though Ford did not have the authority to build complete airplanes, they only had the authority to build parts. This part of the factory right here is the end of the manufacturing area. And as you go down there, those are the final assembly areas. And nobody could build this factory. This was the biggest factory ever built in the U.S. So the factory was divided into 5 sections. And 5 different contractors who had done work with Ford Motor Company were awarded the contract to build this factory. And you can see up here, it's divided into 4 areas, and we'll go over each one of those 4 areas. And the timetable starts here in April 18th of 1941, and it doesn't finish for this section of the factory till February 1st of 1942. And this is kind of a timetable right there. You can see they start building Section 1 in April, and then in June they get the authority to build complete airplanes. And then they add on the plans for the rest of the sections of this building, and you can see that they have different timetables, but they're basically all under construction at one time. And this is Section 1. This is starting in April of 1941. They finish up in October, and this is the manufacturing of the center wing. They identified that was the heart and soul of the bomber. That's the part we've got to build first. And right in here, you can see that they've got the center wing assembly. They've got the machine shops that support the manufacturing of the parts. And this is the part of the factory that was built first. And if you looked at the overview of the factory, this is what it looks like right there. You can see that part of the factory was the first part built. And there is a feature on this factory that really defines the factory. And right here, it's the frame 40 transfer bay. And this was the only bay in the entire factory where you could move from the north line to the south line. And that's where all the parts came together to go out to the shipping dock right here to be shipped out to the plants in Tulsa and Fort Worth, where Ford bombers were built by Consolidated and Douglas Corporation. Next came the tool rooms and the tube bending shops, and that was started construction later after they got going on part number 1. And you can see how part number 2 fits into the design of the factory right here. And Section 3 was forward and aft fuselage assemblies. These were all manufacturing of subassemblies. These are parts to be shipped out to Texas and Oklahoma for other companies to build. But Ford got authority, as I said, in May of 1941 to go ahead and start building entire airplanes, and that's where we go to the final assembly areas. So this is about 1.1 million square feet of parts manufacturing area that was designed by Cohn to build parts for complete bombers. And this is a very distinct section right here because it's a uniform cross-section of the factory, and when you look at the roof line, you can see where that fits in there. So you can see part number 3 here is the start of the North Assembly Bay where they had the sub-assemblies out to this frame 40 transfer bay where they go into the final assembly lines. This is a picture taken in September of 1941. You can see the 3 different sections under construction here. Part 1 is almost done. That's the center wing manufacturing. Part 2, the tool room, tube manufacturing, is about half done. And they've just started on section number 3 right here, which is the North Subassembly and Final Assembly Bay. They've got authority to do the final assembly, so the first thing they build is the South Assembly Bay and subpart manufacturing. And this is what the factory looked like. If you looked west, or east I should say, You've got the 250-foot assembly bays right here, followed by 4 sub-assembly bays that are 60 feet wide. This is about 1,300 feet wide, and this is the uniform cross-section of 80% of the factory. Remember, we designed this factory in a big hurry. We had a bunch of different manufacturers coming in, so it was a very, very simple factory as far as different areas of it went. This allowed quick building, integration of the parts, and one of the things Cohn did was he said, I'm going to design this factory with overhead cranes, and there were about 45 overhead cranes with lifting capacity up to 20,000 pounds that could move anything in the factory, anywhere else in the factory, that allowed a wide open area where you move the parts to the machines in this open air above the floor. And right here, this is where you have that uniform cross-section. It runs from almost the west end of the building down to the end of the assembly area, which adjoins the part that the Yankee Air Museum has saved right over here. That's an overhead picture of showing the area. That's all uniform cross-section. They all are identical in that area. This is Section 4, which is the south final assembly line, is added on to the factory. And then finally they put in Section 5, which is the north final assembly. And this is the key of the factory. You'll notice when you look at this drawing, the part that the Yankee Air Museum has purchased is not there. That was not designed as part of the original factory. And I haven't been able to find out when they decided to put this addition on there. But when you look at this, you can see that this part right out here was not part of that original design that Cohn did back in February of 1942. This is an overhead view of the factory in 1944, and you can see the 2 final assembly bays there that run the length of the building. They're 3,200 feet long. This is the manufacturing tool area up in here. Now, this is a blueprint of the factory and airfield that Ford put out I think you can't see it here. This is October 18th, 1941. And a key feature here is, you see right here, this is Hangar 1. And the end of the building for the bombers is parallel with Hangar 1. And that's why we had the doors right here, that we could roll the airplanes out onto the ramp and bring them down here for the final. If you look at that, you can see that red line right there runs through the end of the factory across the front of the Hangar 1. And right there, there's the date on this blueprint that I found of October 18th, 1941. So it looks like, and even in October of 1941, they had not elected yet to put the addition on the building for the area that was the final assembly. And basically, the airplanes were completed by the time they got to the end of the original building. And when they left that part, they went into the paint booth. They went into the area where they'd put all the decals and the stickers and the markings on it. Then they had an area to fuel it and pull it out of the building. This is the overhead view of the factory right here, and you can see this is the end of the original design building by Cohn, and this area right here is the part that the Yankee Air Museum has saved, and you can see that's right in line with Hangar 1, which would be a very logical way to have those two laid out. This is May of 1942. This is the first prototype being built by Ford. They basically had to get a bomber and put it together slowly and take it apart to figure out how to do it. But if you look at beyond the bomber right there, this is a plywood and 2x4 wall that's temporary wall right there at 1942. The factory has not gone much beyond what the Cohn had originally designed at that time. And right here you can see this is frame K40, which is the north assembly line. And if you look right over here, you can see there's a break in the overhead structure here that once you take out and you finish the building, this is where that temporary wall was, because there's that break and there's that frame 60 right there. And then you can see they extended it all the way down and moved the doors out to within 6 feet of the Wayne-Washtenaw County line, which resulted in the famous turntables so that the airplanes would be delivered in Washtenaw County. And because Ford thought he would build trucks, cars, tractors, something in this factory, and he didn't want to pay those outrageous taxes in Wayne County. So right there you can see this is the red part is the building designed by Cohn, and then the add-on at the end of the building right there is the area that was built after that, and it's the part of the factory right down here that we have saved. Now this factory right here, you show this red line, where's my pointer here? In the middle, that's the Frame 40 transfer bay, and this is a shipping dock, and this is a receiving dock. And the rail tracks actually ran inside the building, then came back out again and went inside here, so that they had the rail cars inside the building in the winter for loading. And that was originally designed into the factory. So this is the plant as it was designed in February of 1941. The red area there is the original bomber plant. The red areas you see right here are additions that General Motors put on over the years to expand the factory from about 4.2 million up to about 5.1 million square feet. Well, they really built it in a hurry. I mean, they broke ground. They started taking trees down in March of 41, and they dug the first holes for foundation in April 18th of 41, and they were producing parts by September of 1941 in this factory. So right now, this is how the factory looked in November of 2013. The original black building is the Ford bomber plant. The red areas are the add-ons for GM. And this is the first picture I took of December 1st last year, over a year ago. And you can see that they've started to cut in from this side of the building across the front right here. This is the old manufacturing stamping area up into the tube and tool shop area. About 2 weeks later, they've gone through this center console right here. And when I talked to the guy tearing it down, they found all kinds of contaminants in here, PCBs, arsenic and stuff. So they couldn't tear that down right away. They had to come in and do the mitigation to get the hazardous materials out of there. This is the east end of the factory. This is the original factory right here, and you can see the foundation right here. This used to be part of the GM structure. They tore that down almost the first thing they did because it was a very light structure. It was like sheet metal with structural steel because they weren't building things there. They're only storing things there. And because of this building being here, the usable length of runway 27 was shortened by about 250 feet because this structure went into what the clear area was for the airplane. So the airport wanted that taken down first so we could use the full length of runway 27 here at Willow Run Airport. It snowed last winter. You can see that in this picture right here. And you can see right now that this is a couple weeks after I took the first picture. They've already started working down the side of the building here on the final assembly bays, taking the factory down. Another view of the same thing there. You can kind of see that this is at Area 3 where they had the fuselage front and aft section. And you can see right here, this is the GM part of the add-on, and they're rapidly moving down here, tearing down all of the GM structure. Another picture of, this is the area that GM added on. They're taking most of that off the factory. Again, this is a picture of the taken from the north. You can see the admin building here in the front and the brick, and then you've got the bays being cut deeper and deeper. This is just about the end of December of last year, and they've almost completely finished all the GM structure here on the north side of the building, as has been taken off the building. So by the end of December, you can see most of the red there on the north side is gone. And they've kind of gone into the two final assembly bays already, starting to move down them and remove most of the manufacturing area. Like I said, they had contaminants in here, and that kept them from taking that part down. Again, the Michigan in the winter loses a lot of its color. It's kind of a black and white photo. But you can see that they're continuing to take down the building here. They've pretty well cleaned out everything except that center support structure here in the original manufacturing and tool area. Again, this is taken from the south side of the building looking in here. You can see they've pretty well cleared this area out. This is the end of January, and you'll notice that most of the GM section here is now gone, that they've completely taken down that structure on the north side of the building that GM had put in there. And again, when you look at this, you can see this uniform cross-section of the building when you look down the assembly bays. Right there, you can see the 250-foot bays and the 460-foot bays right there. They're starting to work their way down the assembly line to take this factory down. This is the original part of the building that they pretty much took out of the building first. You can see we had the presses for the parts. The center wing parts were coming in here to the flow to the center wing. Fuselage sections in here, tube bending, tool room, small parts, and then their major tooling parts in this area right here. This is kind of what that part of the factory looked like. You see the lower overhead roof and the rows of machines that the workers were putting the parts in there. And this is the center wing assembly bay, which is on the south side. This is where the pieces were put together in these rigs and then gone into the setup fixtures here and then moved on down to the assembly line. That's what it looked like when they were using that for manufacturing. So at the end of January, they've cleaned out this center section here because they got rid of the contaminants. They've got one little section left here in the corner that's original GM, and they're starting to move through the factory. Again, right here, you see that uniform cross-section, the 250-foot bays and the 460-foot bays. They've taken down all the GM structure now. They've taken out this wall here on the north part of Section 2. Now, on the building right here, you see these little like a fort where they've got the cannonades. This is where the employees entered. The parking lot was over here, and Ford had originally designed walkways because they had the trucks and the cars and the traffic going through there, and they didn't want to get the employees hurt. So this is where you went in and you punched in. And your badge only allowed you in these certain areas. If you had a badge to work on the fuselage subsections, you were only limited to this part of the factory. You didn't have the free will to move around this building. Okay, you can see right now, this is in February. They've started to cut into the side of the building here into the final assembly area. This area right here is that frame 40 transfer bay. So this is sub-assembly section, and when they move up here, they go into final assembly. And right up here is the part of the building that we saved. This is taken from the east looking west, and you can see they've started to take down the side structure here. They've taken down the employee entrance columns and pretty well exposed this area. Looking at it again this way, you can see where they've cut out that part of the roof on the final assembly. There's your frame 40 transfer that they're moving towards because this is the final assembly down here. So at the end of February, they've pretty well cleaned this area out, and they've started working into this area right here. And you can see by March, they've really started to take bigger and bigger cuts out of there. All of the GM structure on the north end of the building is now gone. Again, this is taken looking northwest. This is the part of the hangar that we saved right in here. And this is where the fore and aft sub-assemblies were manufactured. And these bays were wide open from one end to the other. Other than the jigs and fixtures in there, it was just a wide open bay. And you can see right here inside this structure, here are the rear fuselage assemblies being assembled. This is what it looked like in March. We went inside the building to look for artifacts. they'd pretty well cleaned the factory out. There wasn't much artifact left in that factory. But this is what the area looked like where they were building those rear fuselage assemblies. And this is, again, that same area. You can see the smaller subsections all coming together for the bomber parts. Again, this is looking west on that assembly bay. You can see the assemblies are getting more and more complicated as they move down to the bottom here. And up at the top here goes back into the Section 1. This is Section 3 of the factory. And now you can see this is the March 15th. They've gone both on the north and south assembly bays. Sub-assembly bays are pretty well being cleaned out. This is looking west. You can see this is the assembly bays. A lot of these sections, you'll see they did not take them down because GM had come in there and subdivided the factory into different areas, and they had built additional structures in here that had integrated into the original structure, and they didn't want to tear all the building down until they were sure it would be stable when they took those structures out. So we'll see photos later on that you'll see sections of the factory standing all by themselves. It was because of the internals that GM had put in there that made them delay in taking those parts down. But this is the Frame 40 transfer bay, and you can see right here they got this like a railroad track that these carts run on with the parts on them. And this allowed the sub-assembly parts for front and rear fuselage on the north line to move to the south line and also move out to the shipping point. And also you see the rigs right here. This is the mating fixture. This is where the eyelets would go in for the overhead cranes to lift this up and move it to the point where they would join it to other parts of the fuselage. In fact, this right here is a turntable that allows this section now to move down the assembly line to mate up with the other parts of the airplane. This is the end of March. The Frame 40 transfer bay is right there, and you can see they pretty well cleaned out the sub-assembly areas with the exception of these two parts which had the internal structure that they didn't want to take down right away. So at the end of March, you can see we moved down there quite a ways on the assembly line, taking the building down. April 11th, you can see up in this area right here now that this is right where the Frame 40 transfer bay is, and they pretty well cleared all this area out. This was all of the sub-assembly for the fuselage and the wing. And now they go on down behind from Frame 40, and they're Frame 40. In fact, this diagram right here shows you this transfer bay right here, and you can see the parts moving from the south line to the north line, and from the north line to the south line, then back out here to shipping. And this is where they dropped the engines in, right about this part that they're taking down right now. And this is that area we looked at right there where they installed the engines. This is that Frame 40 transfer. Again, GM had built an entire brick wall in here to separate parts of the building. They'd installed two giant compressors right here that didn't belong to Ford. And if you're looking at the building now, you can see we're moving down towards the part of the bomber plant that the museum had saved. Again, showing pictures of the parts coming down. And what they've taken down the roof, but they've left this center island up as part of the structure of the building. Now this is looking due west. This would be the end of the old building where it was finished with the Cohn sections, and these doors would have probably been at the end of that assembly line, and the airplanes would have come out of here and gone to Hangar 1 for the various work. But this is the part they cut out right here where the assembly started on both the north and south bay. In this picture right here, taken towards the end of April, you can start to see that whole uniform assembly line that ran from down here all the way down here. As they're taking sections out, the uniform cross sections are evident there. So by the end of April, pretty much all of the sub-assembly area is gone, and they've moved into the final assembly areas and started taking that out. The middle of May, Grass is starting to turn green. A strange thing at this factory. They're tearing the factory down, but they still cut the grass every 2 weeks. They were cutting the grass in October still as they took the factory down. There was no factory there, but the machines were out there cutting the grass. I don't know, maybe there was a 5-year contract they hadn't expired or something, but...
Well, I had to see what they were tearing down.
Yeah, they get lost in the grass.
Like when they striped the parking lot at Hangar 2.
Right.
Yeah, then they sealed it off. Nobody could drive in it. Again, now you can see it. Not only they cut through the 2 final assembly bays, they've now cut into the manufacturing area that adjoined the final assembly bays. And you can see that in these pictures right here. Here's the north and south final assembly bays. This is about the middle of May. They've gone through this center island right here. They've left that up, and they're coming into this area. This is that frame 40 transfer bay right there. Again, this is a good picture taken that day. You can see the uniform cross-section of the building right here with the final assembly bays. This is a picture I found in a magazine. This is summer 1945. They're dismantling the factory. Ford quit building the bombers in June of 1945. But when the contract was canceled, they had many, many parts of the airplane still under assembly. And you can see right here, here's the center wing sections, and just cutting those up and scrapping them as they clean the factory out. This is what the factory looked like under construction. This is looking probably east down the north assembly bay for the factory. This is what it looked like when it was full under production, with all the bombers in there, nose to tail, going down the line. And after everybody moved out in October of 1945, you can see that it's just a wide open building that could be used for almost anything. Again, another picture in the middle of May. You just see them eating up parts of the building. These structures right here are not parts of the Ford factory. When GM put in some extra heavy machine for manufacturing, they had to dig out these foundations to put the machines in there. And as they dug those foundations out, they put these white fences up around there so the drivers of the machines wouldn't drive into these holes and wreck themselves in the machines. So this is what we have right here. Those red areas there are the parts for the final assembly where the airplanes came together, where they built the pilot's floor. Those are all coming out of the factory. And right here you see the airplanes coming. This is the frame 40 transfer bay on the north line. And these are the fuselages going over to the south line or to be shipped out. You see the rigs here to carry the nose over to this structure and drop it down onto the center wing. They mate that. They move down the line. And you see the rear fuselage now is going to drop onto that center wing. Then they come on down here. They drop the engines on the airplane. They don't have the wingtips on them. And this is about frame 50 right here in this picture. There's 50 going the other way. You can see down here they move to the center and they start putting the outer wing panels on them. And the factory was originally going to end right here at this line, but they go down into the turntable area here. Now you see them still moving down the line after they put the outer wingtips on. You can see this airplane has one on this wing, but it doesn't have that one on yet. And there's the wing being held by the crane right there. And there's probably a very small guy in there they used to call midgets. Again, they've got the outer wings on. They're moving down there. They're coming to the point where they get into the turntables to turn the corner. And that's right in this area right here. You can see that they've pretty well taken the outer wall out. The building was built of structural steel with brick. And the white part you see here was something they called gunite, which was just concrete without aggregate in it, poured over mesh. And as far as I can tell, it hadn't been painted, it hadn't been repaired, it had been standing there 70 years intact. And most of the rubble piles you see around the factory when they're tearing it down is those collections of gunite that they tore off the building. Right now you can see we're coming down here up into the area that the Yankee Air Museum saved. The building is coming down by the middle of May. This is the frame 40 transfer bay. This is the part that has the structure in it they haven't torn down yet. Again, this is the fuselage assembly area. This is where the center wings, after they were machined here, one of Ford's, quote, big secrets that he could do 42 machining operations in 17 minutes and hold them to 2/10,000ths of an inch that allowed parts to easily be adapted to them. Then they'd go into these panels right here and they'd move down the line, adding parts to it. By the time they got to here, they had the landing gear, the turbochargers, all the plumbing, gas tanks, everything installed in those wings. So by the end of May, you can see that we've got the final assembly area starting to come down pretty rapidly. This area right here would be on the north line where they're coming down and putting the guns and right after they put the engines on, they haven't put the wingtips on. And this is the end of the assembly line right here that used to face east. These are the doors. This is where the GM structure used to be. This is the end of the original building, and this is the Ford add-on at some time after about probably December of 41, January of 42 that became the part that we purchased. And now you can see they've pretty well got this sidewall down except for these areas that they want to keep up. You can see the building starting to clean out here. And now, by the middle of June, we're down in this area. We've torn down those doors at the end of the line right here. They've torn down the structure. And right here is one of the turntables would have been right here to allow the B-24s to come down this west assembly line in the final area. This area right here was not saved by the museum, but that was the paint booth. That's where the airplanes went in for their paint. And this is the famous Ford photo of the end of the assembly line with the bombers making the turn on the turntable and going through the hangar. And this is the part that you see in that photo right there. This structure is the end of the assembly line where the tables turn to go into the final assembly area. And again, you can see it right here. This is where the turntable would have been right here to pull the airplane up in there and go into the final assembly bay. You can see this is the paint booth right here. They've got the door down. The door is up on that one, and that's where the airplanes would go in for their paint. So by the end of June, they've taken off this end of the building. They still have this 40-foot center island, and they've got these three crossover points where GM had put additional structure in there. Starting in July, they're continuing to dismantle the building. And this is the South Assembly Bay. And you can see right here, this is the B-24s making that turn going into the paint booth right there, which is this part of the building. Where's my pointer? Right in there. You can see our part of the building is now starting to stand alone by itself there. This picture I'm going to show you next was taken right here, looking at the airplanes coming down to the turntable. And you can see them right there on the turntable making that turn. This picture was probably taken in early 43. Again, you can see the building is pretty much down except for these areas that they've got the internal structure in. The factory is pretty well gone. There is our part of the building we saved, and you can see that they've taken the paint booth off here, so our building is starting to pretty well stand alone. And this is a picture taken in May of 1942. And you can see right here, this is the part of the factory we're going to save, and this is the west bay of the factory. This is the wall right here for the east bay. So you can see in May of 42, there's still a lot of work to do on this part of the building. In fact, we saved the newest part of the building. We got the best deal there. And right here, this is taken shortly thereafter. You can see that they've got both of the structures there for the end of the assembly line. And this is the area we saved right here. Now, there's an interesting thing in here. they have in the middle of this assembly bay, they have a mechanism that'll move a B-24 sideways so they can move it from the west line to the east line. If one line gets jammed up or if they need to change how they're doing things, they could do that. And the tracks are still in our part of the building. You can see the structure right here that kind of lines up with the nose wheel and the main gear. And they had like little carts they'd taxi on or pull them on, and then they'd move sideways through the factory to give them the use of both lines. It might have also been built in there if part of the factory was bombed, that line wouldn't be jammed because they could move them across the factory. And this is going down the center of our part of the building. And this is the original B-24 mechanism that moved that airplane forward once every 2 hours. The little cables and chains aren't in there, but that's the structure that's the original building. Our part of the building was almost completely untouched by GM its entire time it was in the factory. It is very, very few structural changes made to that part of the building, so it's very much like it was originally. And you can see right here is the assembly line comes right down to here. And this is where the assembly line would end and the cart that pulled them down the line would end. And there's a big turntable there so the chain can make the turn. And then they'd be tugged in right here. And there's where the main mounts would go. And this was the fueling station. In early 1945, Ford got a contract to build 8,400 and some odd number B-24Ns. The B-24N had a single tail like the Privateer and the B-29. So when they built 3 of these airplanes here, and then they had the contract canceled, but they had to cut this section out of the bomber plant so that the tails of the B-24Ns could go into the fueling station. And this is what it looked like before they cleaned out the area, so you could see the track on the floor there. They really did a good job of cleaning this factory up.
Will that whole floor stay, Randy?
There's a concrete floor that's going to stay there. They had the 1 1/4 inch blocks of wood that were so soaked with everything that's bad in the world that they had to take those away. We'll probably have to pour concrete in there to level the floor out because there's rises and falls in the floor. But our intent is to preserve that center line that you could see where the assembly line used to go down through there. This is one of the carts that's still in our part of the building. This is one of the cranes that Ford used. And you can see right there with the label and everything on it. I got to go back. Okay, yeah, I skipped this one right here. This is a 1945 photo that shows that very crane that we still have in the factory. It's the original crane. It has the same markings on it, and
You got 2 of them, aren't there, in there?
there are 2. There's one on the west end or the north end that I have not seen a photo of, but this one is a photo taken in 45 that matches the crane that we have right now. This is what the fueling bay looked like. You can see they got the catwalks above the wings, and the fuelers would step down on the airplane. They dropped this wall so if a fire started that it would protect the rest of the factory. And this is another view of the same rigamajig with the fuel stations up here, and then they'd fuel the airplane, oil the airplane, and then they'd tow it out of the factory with the little tug we have out in our high bay area.
Tanks up completely at the time?
Oh, yeah.
I can't tell you if they did or not.
Because there's 3,200 gallons in them.
They were going to fly them for 2.5 hours, and they might have had to check the transfer systems and the cross-feed systems, so they probably would put quite a bit of fuel on them. They had storage capacity of 250,000 gallons of fuel at the airport. But if they were fueling 20 airplanes a day at 3,000 gallons, that's 60,000 gallons a day. And this is an early picture coming out of the factory with one of the early model B-24s. And this is what it looked like in the middle of July. They have stripped out all the old building right up to the part that we have saved. This part is not going to come down. That's been preserved by us. Again, just showing the demolition of the factory as they move down the line. So by the end of July, you can see almost all of the uniform cross-section structure has been removed from the factory, with the exception of these few cross areas where they've got structural problems that they can't take it down yet. On a lot of these photos, I worked a really nifty deal. I made Dave Steiner pay me to fly around and take these pictures.
Buy a ride with Randy.
And he survived.
Yeah. I move very quickly sometimes, though. Okay, again, here we're looking at the first part of August. You can see that the structure is around our building is really coming down. This area out here, it was all GM structure, is gone now. The area up here is completely stripped out of almost all of its structure. Again, but you can still see the skeleton of the old factory here. This is the frame 40 transfer bay, and the uniform cross-section that goes down in here towards our part of the building. And this is part of our building that was hidden by the GM structure for many, many years. And they've taken that structure out of there. And when we discovered this, we found out there was probably about 200 foot of wall that we didn't have to replace because it was already there in the factory. And right here, you're looking down that alley. This is our part of the building that they've taken the structure away from. Again, this is our part of the building. They're taking all the structure away from this part of it. And right here, you can see a little bit of two of those 60-foot bays that used to belong to that uniform cross-section where the factory originally ended. This is a good overview of the factory. You can see it's all stripped out here, except for these areas right here. Now, they're starting to take structure off here, but inside here, they still have concrete brick walls that they've got to take down. There's a picture again of our part of the building. This is where the turntable would have been, where they come through here and go into the paint bay. Now they've taken all the structure off the side of the building, and our part of the building is now standing alone there. This part right here was the dope room, and that's not where the employees went at lunchtime to take a puff. That was where they put the fabric with the dope on it to tighten up the fabric. There's what the factory looked like at the end of August. Just a few of these internal structures left. On the south side of the factory here, we still have some of the GM structure, but pretty much the rest of the building has been taken down. This is standing at the end of our building. This is the north end of our building looking west, and you see that uniform cross-section with the 150-foot bays, the 40-foot structure, and then the 4 60-foot bays. There's the dope room coming down. You can see the gunite coming off of there. They just crack it off like, frosting on a cake. Now you can see they're starting to go into the center island structure. There's very little of it left. We're here in the first part of September, and the factory is really being cleaned out now. Right here, we're just looking at a few of the pieces left. You can see the brick wall right in there. They've pretty well taken this all down except for that part right there. This is still intact. This is the frame 40 transfer bay. Just another view of the island parts that are still left standing there. You can see right here, this is that part where the turntable was, where they went into the west final assembly bay. But by the end of September, our building is pretty much standing alone. They've got the structure up here, the frame 40, and then a few of the little islands right here, but the building is pretty well down. This is a picture taken in 1944. This is the fueling island. This is where the trucks would go to get gas. The hangar itself was plumbed, and this is a picture taken about 2 months ago. So kind of a historic view of now and then. This is the frame 40 transfer bay. They're finally starting to take that down. And this is a special machine they have. It's got a really, really long neck on it. And it goes up and it grabs the gunite and just pulls it till it breaks. And you can see as it's doing that, you've got all the pile of the gunite down there on the ground. You see almost all the structure is now gone. The only thing left standing is this part at the west end that they left alone. They've taken out the internal structure on this, but we can still see that 40-foot tower running down the assembly bay in the center here that kind of gives you an outline of what the factory was. This is just a picture. You can see they've taken all the internal structure now out of this original piece, and it's going to come down very shortly. This is a picture of that tall crane just grabbing this gunite and breaking it off. This guy's spraying water on to keep the dust down. And now we're up here to the front of the building. This is the famous Alfred Cohn office building. GM added a story to this. It was originally a 2-story building. GM made it 3, but they're now taking down this brick structure at the front of the building in the middle of October. You can see right now that the factory is pretty well completely gone. All of the structures have been turned into piles of rubble laying around there. So at the end of October, there's some structure left up here at the front of the building and a few little islands back in here, but the building is pretty well completely gone. This was a rainy day we were up there, so it doesn't show very much, but you can see right here all of the structure in the front of the building, including the office building that Cohn had built, is gone. And this is an interesting picture right here. These are the tunnels that were underneath the building. Those all had to be cleaned out, filled, and put concrete in. And this is the Form 40 transfer. And this is the one running up the center pipes underneath the center island. And they ran right up into here. They made a 90-degree turn to go into our part of the building. And this is what they look like. This is right outside the part of the building that we saved. And you can see all the plumbing and the piping and everything that was underground in this factory. And there was about a 6-foot-tall walkway that went through here that allowed you to get into the utility parts of the building. This is the front of the building. You can see they're starting to take that wall down. By the middle of November, they've taken down half of the Cohn building. This must have been really hard for them to take down because you'll see a picture here. This stands by itself. And if you go by it right now, you'll see that this still is about a quarter way up. Maybe they couldn't crush this like they did the gunite. But it's kind of iconic that it stood there. I thought maybe they should kind of just leave that there as a monument. Are we going to get the placards that are right here in the center of the field? Anybody talked about that yet? You know, the historic placards for Michigan? Okay. Okay. Right here, you can see the front of the Cohn building standing there all by itself as kind of a last gasp of holding on to the factory. Now they've taken the whole front structure off the building. They've turned the corner, and this is the only part of the building now standing. And when you drive by there on an E-course road, you can see they've got the tubes, and they're cleaning out all the plumbing and the heating ducts and throwing it on the ground to salvage it. But right here is what the building looks like probably about a week ago. You've got piles of rubble here that they're going to haul away. But when you look at this, you can see the structure of the original factory is laid out here in the way that these structures were put together on the foundation. So the footprint of the factory is still there. So there at the end of November, a little bit of the building left up here, and our building down here we saved, and that's the end of the bomber plant. The factory right there with the GM looking overhead on the factory. That black line in the square in the middle is the uniform cross-section. The red parts are the GM factory. And this is what the factory looked like when you took the roof off with all the various assembly areas in there. But this is November of 2013. December, we started tearing the building down. You can see the GM part disappearing. And it's gone. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll try to entertain them. A lot of this was put together by reading things of what people did and looking at structures and drawing some conclusions. Yes?
Were they afraid of bombing of Nazi or Japanese actual bombers coming over this plant?
There was a concern about that. In November of 1940, the U.S. figured that the Germans could invade England anytime they wanted. There was concern if England fell, Canada might go with them, and you could have German bombers in Canada. And if they didn't have England, they would have to build B-29 and B-32 bombers. So Willow Run was designed to build both the B-29 and the B-32 bomber. That's why the assembly bays are 150 feet wide. The delivery doors are 144 feet wide. Even though the B-24 only has a 110-foot wingspan, there were plans that they could build bigger airplanes here. By the time they got the factory up, the Germans were so involved in Russia, the threat of them being attacked had kind of gone away. Around the edge of the building, over all the windows, there's a track around the building. The part of our building still has it. Hangar 1 still has it. And I've been told that's where they would hang the blackout curtains if they had to work at night. And then everybody said, no, all buildings have that. That's where the window washers hang their equipment. So one of the two stories fits on that one.
What about like anti-aircraft gun placements and security?
As far as I could tell, there was no anti-aircraft available at this field. In fact, all of southeast Michigan probably had no anti-aircraft capability. Yes?
Do you have any idea what happened to the steel and the other debris that they took this down? What did they do with all that material?
Well, it's a strange thing. They did not pay to have this building demolished. Companies bid on how much money they will give you to take it down. And the steel was probably in the millions and millions of dollars of scrap value. It was something like 35,000 tons of steel. And a lot of the material, the gunite, they use that as fill. They'd crush it up, the concrete would fall out. They've got all those tunnels filled. They got low areas filled. They'd use that as fill, and then they put concrete over the top of it.
So all that cement is staying?
Yes. Part of it is if they keep the cement there, they don't have to do the hazardous material mitigation, EPA mitigation of the ground underneath the concrete. So it's going to stay intact that way to keep the pollutants in the ground. An interesting thing that we discovered, I shouldn't say we, other people discovered, but I heard about it, is such things as easement for utilities, sewers, water. There were none. This factory was built so fast by so many different people, and the urgency to get it up was the normal things you do to secure easements for your utilities and your water and stuff weren't done. They just built the factory. And correct me if I'm wrong, because you guys know more. We were going to pay something like $1 million to bring water or gas in from north of Ecorse Road to heat this building. And as they're tearing it down, they find a water main it's a 12-inch water main that's about 20 feet from our part of the building. Nobody knew it was there until they started digging things up. GM didn't even know how the water got in that part of the building. Yes?
One of the big reasons why it took so long from when we did a purchase agreement to when we were able to actually close on the building was sorting out this matter of utility easements. All parties were very gracious and very cooperative, but it just proved to be mind-bendingly complex for exactly the reasons Randy outlined. Built a big complex plant in a hell of a hurry under wartime conditions and just didn't sweat the small stuff. 70 years later, we had to sweat it all.
At least you didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Heck, you did.
Yeah.
Is there any idea who are the possible customers for this land, or what will ever happen to the property around?
I don't think they have any customers besides us. Would that be a good guess?
Well, we've kind of, as a matter of policy, made a point of not speaking for the building's owners, but there is a company, Walbridge Aldinger, that currently has an option on the balance of the site, the parts that we're not getting, and their stated plan has been to develop a testing facility for what they call connected vehicles. Some of the stuff you've read and heard in the media about the cars that are going to drive themselves, that is the stated future use of the parties who have the option on the rest of the site.
Very good. Yes.
It's going to take longer to put the factory up or tear it down.
Well, I think it's almost a draw. Consider they started in November of 2013, and we're in November of 2014, and they're just finishing up on the north end of the building. And you consider they broke ground on April 18th, and by a year later, the factory was almost complete building bombers. It looks like they built it faster than they tore it down.
We're just very glad it didn't take longer to sort out the easements that are going to build the building.
Okay.
Didn't have any easement.
Yes.
How many equivalent planes could they have built with all the parts that they shipped out to other plants?
Well, Ford gets credit for building 8,685 airplanes. That includes the 2,000 kits that they sent to Consolidated and Douglas down in Fort Worth and Tulsa. Those are credited to both Douglas and Consolidated as airplanes they built because the subassemblies came from Detroit. But Ford claims them because all they had to do is snap them together like a Lego kit to put the airplanes out on the street. But you'll find that a lot of Consolidated airplanes, you looked inside of them, they had Ford part numbers all over the inside of the airplane, even though the outside said CO for Consolidated Dallas or Fort Worth, wherever they were building it. Interesting side note on that is 50% of the bomber airframe weight, that's all the weight of a bomber, was built by the auto companies, much of it here in Detroit. And over 50% of the Enola Gay, the bomber that dropped the atomic bomb, was built here in Detroit by Chrysler, Nash, Budd, Burroughs, and shipped out to Omaha. And the Omaha factory was one of the factories that was built after the edict that all airplane factories have to be able to accommodate the B-29. And Omaha started out as a B-26 factory and was shifted to the B-29 in late 1943.